Yeah. So what is that? What is that like? Because so much of your life after, obviously, after you did the college basketball stuff and you stopped that, and then you're doing bodybuilding, and
Hmm.
it's involved in this, the steroids and this. Did you ever run a lot of stuff, or was it like minimal stuff, or did you go through a phase of where you did X amount and then you're like, I don't need this, and
Hmm.
I just always wondered the process on
It's
that.
almost like a combination of everything you said except extreme amounts of stuff. First of all, I think what happened for
Because
me,
people look at guys like you, they're like, and I interrupted, I'm sorry, but they're like,
yeah,
yo, he's got to be
he's
on
got to
this
be
and
on
this.
everything under the
Yeah,
sun, right?
a
And I
hundred
think
percent.
that's speaking on one's insecurity. Number one, number two, they have to ask themselves, were you ever an elite athlete growing up?
Yeah,
And for how long? And what could you do? What feats of strength? How
yeah,
fast were you? Were you even all state?
right.
And what athletes were they around when they were growing up? I mean, for me, I was always around athletes growing up.
Yeah,
Just in my neighborhood alone, we had Nate Burleson,
yeah.
we had his brother Kevin, we had Nate Robb, we had Jamal Crawford, Jason Terry.
So you saying in the
We
relationship of
just
like
had
what's
like a lot of
possible?
people. Well, absolutely. So
Yeah,
you get to see like, wow, this person's fast, this person's strong. Okay, so the competitive nature kept your ass in the gym or on the field. Now, to answer your question, I mean, I was competing naturally against guys that weren't,
yeah,
and that wasn't by choice. My friend, shout out to Josh Crandall and John Bauer out of Colorado. They were just like, "Hey, you should do this bodybuilding." I ended up doing it. I'm at the show. The day of the show, I'm like, "Hey, I gotta go take a piss. Where I go pee at? To go do the drug test." And they're like, "Ain't no drug test." I
yeah.
was
Nah.
like, "Word, like you." They're like, see, if we would have told you beforehand, you would have never done it. When I did two shows, yeah, I did the Northern Colorado and then I did the Mr. Colorado my first year. I won the overall. I won every title in my first show. The second show, I won my weight division, but didn't win the overall. Lost by like a point or something.
Yeah,
After that, I was like, if I were to do something, now would be the time because I kind of proved myself. I
yeah,
kind of seen like what's out there as far as like, top level physiques, at least on the local amateur level.
yeah.
And I was already beating guys that were taking stuff. So I started off with just a little bit of test. And
Yeah.
it
What's
was,
a little bit of test?
when I say a little bit of test, that means 1 cc a week of test. Like when
Yeah.
I say a little bit, that was 1 cc a deca a week.
Yeah,
That was a cycle.
yeah.
And it
It's
worked.
it's interesting because I've seen photos of you playing college basketball. I think you had these like crazy calves. You just had crazy. There's always genetic outliers, just period, where
Yeah.
people are. I mean, like Ronnie Coleman, from what I understood before he ever got on, also just looked like a freak bodybuilder
Bro,
already.
he played football jacked. And I know that for a fact because he went to Grambling, right?
Yeah,
So I had family that played there too, that went there as well. And they would tell me about Ronnie, and I'm like, was he really jacked like that? They're like, bro, like he was huge.
I just got the
You know?
lottery on genetics. You
Yeah,
too, though.
just got. I mean, it's wild what the body can do, right? And the motivation and all that. But as far as the gear stuff, I mean, I always kept it minimal because I was already beating guys that were taking stuff like
Yeah.
a lot. When I say a lot, we're talking about a couple grams of test a week.
Fuck.
And I've
A couple grams?
a couple, bro. But let's keep it real. Like there's a lot of dudes, man, that if they were to be hit with a lie detector, they're like, "Oh yeah, I run that right now." I think the problem was that when people were able to get all different types of stuff, it's like,
Yeah,
okay, you could pick any car. You're not going to just pick one. You're going to pick 10.
yeah.
So with the gear, I think what happened, at least for me, was did I have access? Yes. But then I was more just like in a way, I wouldn't call myself a savant, but I was like, well, what does Winnie do? What does Primo do? What does this do? What does that? I don't need all of it at once. Like I need to understand what's its main purpose
Yeah.
because I'm just trying to run this race, the fastest time in this race for the Olympic final. I don't need to be running that, off season,
Yeah.
just to look swole for vanity purposes. My whole thing was just for competition and it worked. I will say the insecurities do set in when you are, I was already winning the Olympia and I remember going against Kai And I had heard all these different cycles that he was doing, right? And guys on the East Coast, I mean, they may not like to hear this from me being a West Coast guy, but they're usually harder for a reason.
I've heard this.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I've heard that.
And I'm like, man, what's he taking? You know what I'm saying? Because you're just curious. And sometimes you're like, I don't want to hear this shit. But at some point I was like, man, I just want to know. And I was like, man, I can't do that.
I've heard crazy things about Kai as well.
Yeah.
I've never spoken in depth to him about it.
And
I'd
it's
love
not
to talk
to
to him.
shout him out in a negative way, but like we all hear things. It was more just like the East Coast guys taking more grams of this and gram of here, 12 IUs of growth or insulin and all this other shit. I'm just like, man, that just sounds like a lot of pinning. I mean, even as I'm explaining it, it's just a lot.
I can't believe that. Also, this is another caveat I think people don't understand, because when we start talking about gear, people get all like, they start listening like, oh, I need to do this and that. This is not for everyone. Like some people just genetically clearly can take a lot more of that, what would damage a lot of normal people.
Oh, 100%. If it was easy, everybody'd be good. At the end of the day, I mean, we see the barrier of entry going into a gym, bringing their tripod, and they can train. But then you see the other person do the same thing, and now they're running a real stack. But they all only get to a certain level, right?
Yeah.
And most of them, they choose not to compete because they realize they're probably still not good enough because they ain't going to train as hard. They're not going to diet as well.
Yeah.
They don't also understand that it's the nutrient timing with the gear that help, achieve a certain desired result, and the lighting, all those things, like so many different nuances that you can't control. You have to know how to deal with. And in fact, I've said it before, someone want to throw me some money, we do the lie detector. I did the 2007 Arnold Classic. And then I placed fifth. And I remember looking at my coach and he was like, well, if you can get another off season, we can try some growth. And I was like, what's that?
Yeah.
And
This is in 2007? Okay.
this was literally, what's the year? 17 years. God.
I know. It's tripped me out too, man.
Fuck, dude. I'm
I know. Time's crazy.
old now. So my wife's going to hate it when she hears me say that. She's like, stop saying how old
I mean, you're
you are.
not old, but you've done this for a
it's
lot
like,
longer than,
yeah. So, I said, okay, that off season, just a couple IUs twice a day. I went from off season of like 250 to 270, and it was like ripped. I'm already round.
Yeah.
So now I just look more cartoonish.
Yeah.
And it helped, you know. And if you look at the pictures from 2007 Arnold Classic and then 2008 Arnold Classic, it's a clear difference. But the point I'm making is, especially to the young adults that are, listening, watching, is that imagine giving yourself this much time to actually make that jump.
We really got to talk about this because